listening to Not So Live from Asteroid G, brought to you by MI6. I'm your host, Mike Finkelstein. With me, as always, is...
The other Mike. How you guys doing?
We are going to be discussing today James Bond. And, I'm going to be honest with you, this is a long fucking franchise that we could probably
26 movies.
Yeah, we would spend an hour on this and maybe not even tackle all that needs to be discussed. So instead of going through it movie by movie, although we can touch upon certain ones if you want, I think it's more important to talk about the Bonds in their franchises as a whole. Because
Right.
when a new Bond is introduced, the franchise definitely takes on a different tone each
hmm
time. It has to reinvent around the character. A tradition set really by George Lazenby when he almost jokingly said to the screen, I'm not the other guy, basically. Which I'm perfectly okay with. If they wanted to make it about a guy taking over the name, a signed name of James Bond, but that wasn't his real name, then that's an interesting angle, and I'm okay with that being the precedent that's set. But we've had, I'm now just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 James Bonds with the 7 on the way, not counting James Bond Jr. Um,
hmm
and I think it's interesting to actually analyze their films from the perspective of each of the Bonds. And I'm going to go out there and say the most horrible thing I know anyone who is a Bond fan can hear. I like George Lazenby best.
I mean, you only got one film to go off of there, so I'll give you a
It was a
pass on
good
this one.
film, though, okay? It was a good film
I
with
mean,
Diana
Look,
Rigg, and there was some real chemistry between them. I really liked that movie.
do not confuse a great written movie for the greatest Bond in that movie. It's a really good movie, but
A
George
really good movie.
Lazenby, I mean, he's fine. All the Bonds are fine.
All the
I
Bonds are
mean,
fine. Let's put it that
all
way.
the Bonds are. That's
Let's put it
why they're Bond. You're not. I mean, to Connery to Lazenby, there's a reason why Connery came back for one more. That's all I'm gonna say.
it was more negotiating at that point. They really wanted Connery for the Lazenby one, from what I saw.
True.
But
True.
he wanted too much money, and so they recast him. And then when they finally were able to lure him back, they were like, "Sorry, Lazenby, we're gonna get the real Bond back." Which,
Yeah, and they paid up for Connery in the end
yeah,
anyway.
and I feel bad because maybe he's not the best Bond, although I really like his movie and I like how they built that movie.
It's a
Um,
really great movie.
it
It's
is.
one of the better Bond movies for sure. I'll give you
It is.
that.
I think he could have been good in the role if they'd given him another 1 or 2 movies to really flesh him out better. Like, there
hmm
was a part of him that I think really would have handled the mourning of his wife dying at the end of his one movie. And I would have
hmm
liked to have seen what he could have done with the future of that character, as opposed to Connery's next movie almost dismissing it like it was nothing and moving on.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Diamonds Are Forever comes after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Connery doing Connery things. He made Bond what it was, and
Mhm.
Lazenby did a fine job. And then Bond, Connery came back and put the Connery swag on it like he
He
would.
did.
So,
He did. And he
what do you expect?
came back again years later for Thunderball, which is not a great James Bond movie, but is actually more watchable than I think people give it credit for.
Those beginning Bond villains too are pretty compelling.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And for Spectre and this evil franchise that MI6 is going against to try to protect the world and everything. There's a lot of really just good storytelling in this world.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Bonds that I don't really like, I didn't much care for Roger Moore of all of them. They even have 1 or 2 movies that are decent. I did like The Man with the Golden Gun, despite the fact that I thought that Roger Moore was too hammy and too dumb to play a proper James Bond. So,
He has, I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 films for Roger Moore. He's
yeah,
the,
he has
the
the most.
longest with Connery. Wow, look at that.
Hmm
Very interesting. And he some good movies in there. Moonraker's very, very good. A View to
Moonraker's really
Kill.
dumb, but it's enjoyably stupid.
Yeah, it's enjoyably dumb. And The Man with the Golden Gun is fantastic. The View to Kill, pretty really good. I mean, there's a lot of just good movies in this franchise overall. And then you get after Roger Moore, you have Timothy Dalton. His Cup of Coffee, 2 movies here, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, both pretty solid movies. But
Yeah,
Dalton. I think Roger Moore was kind of a B-list Sean Connery impression. Timothy Dalton was just there.
Timothy Dalton did the Timothy Dalton thing,
Mhm.
which was weird for the franchise. I think had he existed in a vacuum, he would have been great as Bond. I liked what he did for his version of the character, and I mean
Mhm.
the 2 movies that he got to do, they're pretty decent. Living Daylights and License to Kill are watchable.
Mhm.
He was not the first choice of the producers. They really wanted Pierce Brosnan for the role. But I guess he was too young or too unknown or any combination of that, so they went with Dalton. And then when they had a big contract dispute and they had to go and renegotiate, and Timothy Dalton wanted too much money, they went with Pierce Brosnan afterwards. So it worked out for everyone
Mhm.
involved. But no, I like Dalton. I think Dalton's interesting as a darker take on the character. Not as
Mhm.
interesting in that perspective, though, as Daniel Craig.
Yeah, I think Daniel Craig. We'll touch on Pierce Brosnan,
Hmm.
first, obviously, but Daniel Craig, I thought was a fantastic Bond.
Hmm.
But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. And
That's
again,
fine.
the two movies, though, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, just they're very good quality movies. The
Uh huh.
villains are really great villains in that movie. So it's just really good overall movies, and could have loved to have seen more of Dalton as Bond, I guess, but I think they did the right decision. There's a 6 year gap between Dalton and Brosnan here, between
Hmm.
License to Kill and Goldeneye, and Goldeneye kind of really reinvigorated, the Bond franchise for I would say our
Hmm.
generation in that mid '90s to kind of this is a thing from the '60s, but guess what? It's still good, and I bought it. I was there for it.
Yeah, no, GoldenEye is the best of the four Brosnan movies. I feel like after GoldenEye, although he doesn't act like Roger Moore, the movies around him act like Roger Moore movies. There's something cartoonishly stupid about the adventures they put Pierce Brosnan's very slick, very prim and British secret agent in the middle of. And I mean, Pierce Brosnan is great for the role because he played another secret agent before that inspired them to hire him for that in the first place. Remington Steele ran for 5 years, and it's
Hmm.
doofy and it's dumb, and maybe the movies kind of suit the Remington Steele kind of thing. But Brosnan was able to elevate himself above it with a little bit of a wink and a swagger, you know?
Yeah, and he was a really good Bond. He really brought
Hmm.
that, that real just Britishness to the role that you would
Yes.
expect from someone from MI6, and just the chiseled jawline, slick hair kind of Bond appearance that you would expect from someone
Hmm.
that is a secret agent. And a lot of really good casts with him as well in some of the roles. Femke Jackson in Goldeneye was amazing. Michelle Yeoh, now an award-winning actress, Oscar winner, was part of the franchise in Tomorrow Never Dies. Just some really quality people in these movies with him to kind of enhance the whole cast, which I think is really great.
Counterpoint: the fourth one also had Denise Richards, or third one
Mhm.
had Denise Richards, which is not a great casting choice. Christmas
I
Christmas
skipped that one.
Jones. I know you did. I'm not letting you get away with it though.
Well,
Christmas
we'll skip.
Jones.
Again, sticking with the hammy Bond theme of what we're going to
Right?
call, the air
Yep.
quote love interest, I guess you'd say,
Mhm.
of the franchise. But I mean, Halle Berry in the next. We'll skip over Denise Richards. She's fine, but Halle Berry did a great job in Dying of the Day.
And a
Um,
terrible, terrible fucking movie.
it's I liked it
No.
because I just did because I like Bond, but it is very weak upon rewatch.
Yeah,
That is for sure.
I went into it. I tried to go into all these movies when I watched them a while ago, to
Hmm.
give everyone their due chance because it's important when you're reviewing things to give everything its due chance. And I got to the point where he's windsurfing on a tsunami, and it's so obviously CGI to the point that I'm just like, what are we even doing here, guys? This is bad.
It's like what happened to the Fast and the Furious franchise, which
Right,
originally started out like about the cars and then
right.
went to like how much can we make these things like, suddenly submarines in movies? Like it's like, okay, you stay in your lane, please.
Yeah, I don't. That moment right there ruined that section of films for me. It was bad, and it's tragic to think that that's the movie that he went out with when just like
Mhm.
a couple years later, Mission Impossible 3 would come out and prove how interesting stunts could be. Casino Royale comes
Right.
out, fucking Jason Bourne, his first movie, The Bourne Identity comes out,
Yeah.
and Brosnan starts to look like an artifact. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Just like you forget that he was almost, an image of like, spy elite at some point when all these other movies come out where the people are just doing it better,
yeah.
with, a much more compelling story, much more compelling villains to a degree as well.
I of the Daniel Craig era, I like, and I'm gonna be blasphemous again. I actually like the first two. I think
Mhm.
Quantum of Solace is actually a pretty good follow up. I know there's a lot of James Bond fans that hate it and prefer the movies that come after. Like No Time to Die was fine, but Skyfall and Spectre didn't interest me much at all. But Casino
Mhm.
Royale, is really 2/3 of a good movie with a really tacked on final act that should have been a second film.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
quite a long runtime at
it is.
144 minutes. It's a long movie. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
looking at some of the other ones. Quantum of Solace, a tight hour, 106 minutes right there. It
Hmm.
really kind of like they could have took Casino Royale and split off that last little bit at the end.
Yeah, it should have
Great,
been.
great movie. Mads Mikkelsen as a villain in that movie too. Oh,
Yeah,
is he just not an incredible
he's
actor? I
amazing.
could watch him literally in anything and just be into it.
Bring it around to Hannibal again. If you haven't watched it, you should go watch Matt Mickelson be
mhm.
Hannibal Lecter in Hannibal because oh my god, so good,
He's
so
just a
good.
really just
Yeah,
quality
yeah,
actor and just brings a lot of passion to what he does. So
yeah.
top notches here, and that's it. Casino Royale is fantastic, kind of a remake and a retelling to a degree of some of the earlier Bond
Hmm.
stories, which I could get behind because it's doing them a little more modern is something that I think can bring some relatability to it.
Hmm.
So I enjoyed it. Quantum of Solace quite good to me as well. I like Skyfall. I for more so like I think just like what affects Bond here with losing M and whatnot, and she was kind of that rock for him, throughout the movies and throughout the franchise to a degree that like when she's gone, like how does this really affect this guy? And it does to a tremendous degree really affect him. And I think that the villain in that movie, Javier Bardem, is really great. So I encourage a possible rewatch of Skyfall, maybe.
Ugh,
But I hear what you're saying
I see
about
it
it not
twice.
being as strong as the.
Yeah.
Well, then you're good.
I know my feelings on the matter. My problem is, and this is like I get coming at it from just a viewer perspective. I
Hmm.
unfortunately, as a person who does screenwriting and has done written projects for decades now, I can't
Hmm.
really analyze movies in that respect. It's nice to have your perspective on here because you see things differently than I do, and how Josh does because Josh is also a screenwriter. So it's good to get your perspective on these things.
Hmm.
Um, Casino Royale's big issue for me, and you kind of said it, but like it's not just the runtime; it's that the movie sets up a clear villain,
Hmm.
point, and climax, and then there's an entire extra act at the end that doesn't relate to any of that, and really has another story going on. And I get that they wanted to use it as a way to kill the Bond girl there, when really Ava Green should have just been in every fucking movie ever because she's amazing. Um,
Hmm.
but they should have saved that for another film or the opening act to Quantum of Solace or something. That's the screenwriting problem with that. You've already finished your story. Why are you continuing your movie? In the case of Skyfall, my big issue with that is that it falls into the same problem that so many other movies have had since The Dark Knight. We have a
Hmm.
villain who willingly gets themselves captured, and it's all part of his master plan, ignoring the fact that in The Dark Knight, the Joker doesn't have a master plan. He just sent a bunch of chaotic things out, and while he's there in the moment, he's like, "Oh, I can use this to my advantage," and makes a master plan out of him being captured. That
Hmm.
wasn't his plan at all. He would have been perfectly happy just continuing to carnage wherever he went and just seeing what happened. But Javier Bardem's character purposely gets captured so he can be part of it. And then there are so many other villains that have done the same thing, and I hate this trope so much.
It's definitely been there, done that in
Hmm.
many movies. So I hear you
Yeah.
on that angle. I'm partial to Javier Bardem as an
He's a good
actor
actor.
as well.
Yeah, he's a good
So
actor. I
I
don't
think
debate that point.
yeah, the relationship between him and M, I thought, and the reason
Hmm.
for what he was doing, I liked it. I thought that I believed it as a character.
Hmm.
But I mean, you talking about the villain getting himself captured. I mean, they did that in one of the Avengers movies.
Yes.
The list can
Loki.
go on.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. I
Loki did it. Yeah, and the other the guy looking for Winter Soldier also did it. Zemo also
yeah.
did it. Got himself captured on purpose.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
so like
I hate that trope.
it's overplayed.
It is. It
And
is.
this movie, when did that come out? 2012. So maybe it was kind of like at the touch of the beginning of when this kind of started being a
Mm.
thing, and almost like a reason for villains to get captured. But I hear you. I mean, I guess they want to be there to kind of see what they're doing behind the strings and see the people affecting them in real time. So I guess I get that. But I liked the relationship between Javier Bardem and M. I liked that dynamic, and when she dies, I mean,
It
you
was good.
felt for James. You
It
felt
did
for
give
James.
motivation. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
motivation. I appreciate that more than the stupid. Oh, by the way, the leader of Spectre is also your brother. Like, why? Why even do that?
I don't know.
It's the we had touched upon this in the last podcast with Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. They don't need to be siblings for the relationship to work. They
Yeah,
can
they
just
don't.
hate each other.
Two sides of the same coin, I guess. If you're going for here, the good versus the evil, the light versus the
You
dark.
had Javier Bardem's character. We didn't need it again.
You didn't need it again. You really
No,
didn't. The
no.
Spectre to me, I mean, boy, that grossed a lot of, not quite as much as some of the other ones, but quite a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the weakest of the Daniel Craig
Mm-hmm.
ones.
Mm-hmm.
I was not the biggest fan of it, and I had really high hopes, bringing Spectre back,
Mm-hmm.
from one of the original, villains of Bond. This face marked franchise of evil that you're always struggling against, and then guess what? Hi, I'm your brother, James. Like, hi, I guess we're not getting together at Christmas anymore or
Right?
something. Sure.
Like the brother you thought was dead for 30 years, surprisingly, he's back, which also says not very much about how good you are at a secret agent. I mean, like, come on, you can't even figure out your adopted brother is still alive. Like, dude, that'd be the first
They
thing
picked
I'd
the
do.
wrong hero then. They picked the wrong hero then
Right?
because the brother's obviously better at
So
this than
much
you
better at
are.
the job. Oh my god. I
So, but I mean, it's fine.
I
Whatever.
thought the fifth one, No Time to Die, was fine as a way to tie up the series. It was
Yeah.
decent. It did what it needed to do. It was still kind of tropey in places, and I
Mhm.
like the whole that they clearly wanted to kill James Bond, and so they set it
Right.
up to kill James Bond, and you can just feel the gears of the movie grinding to make sure James Bond dies. Like,
It was a lot of hoops to jump through to make
yes,
sure that this had to happen,
this had to happen.
and I get it. Like the story wrapped up pretty nicely
Hmm.
for Daniel Craig's Bond there, and to touch back on that Bond, it's not a person, it's a code name, and
Double O Seven.
it's a
Yep.
yeah, it's a persona that is adopted among the best of the best spies that MI6 has to offer. So there will be another Bond, and yes, there's going to be another Bond, obviously. But I thought it was a fitting end. Um, for this incarnation of Bond. I thought Daniel
Hmm.
Craig did an amazing job. I would still watch him do Bond things, but I know he was ready to move on.
Yeah.
I'm sure, and done some brilliant side work as well. I'm a huge fan of the two most recent good movies that I like were Knives Out and Glass
Oh
Onion. If
my
you haven't
god,
seen them,
yes.
whoo, were
Yeah.
those some really good movies? And
And
I
you can
hope we
tell,
get more of that character for sure in the
hell yeah.
future.
You can tell he had way more fun doing that than he ever had doing James
Oh yeah.
Bond.
Oh yeah.
Well,
The southern hokey like
yes.
foghorn leghorn draw that I'm just a simple country bumpkin over here who's just a brilliant mastermind that's gonna find out why you kill
I just,
somebody. Like
yeah, oh my god, that scene. Not to go into detail, but the scene in the second movie where there's a whole murder mystery set up as a party game, and
oh
he
man.
like it's supposed to take them 3 hours. He tears it apart in 5 seconds and
It's
does it
supposed to take up the whole
flippantly.
weekend. It's
Yeah,
supposed to take up
yeah,
the whole weekend and he nails it in like 10 minutes. Like
yeah.
it's just so
Flippantly
good.
dismisses it so he can focus on something else, and it's just so hilarious and cruel. I
Oh,
love that.
oh, I'm a
Oh my god.
huge fan of that character. I hope we get more of them. I really do.
Oh, but yeah, no,
But
and I know this isn't what they're gonna do. They're gonna make another James Bond, and they're gonna move on
mhm,
with the franchise probably in a reboot continuity, so we can have the character without all the cruft again, which is what they did for James Craig's character. But
mhm.
I gotta say, I really rather liked the new 007 that they introduced. Nomi Lashana Lynch. She was the one who
Mm.
took over the 007 number in the fifth movie.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought she was really interesting. I would watch her again, and in fact, if they brought her in along with fucking Anna de Armas's Paloma, who was great in her one scene with Daniel Craig at the midpoint of the movie in Cuba. Oh
Mhm.
my god, I would watch those two just go and rampage around the world as James Bond and assistant for like ever. Like,
Yeah,
give me all their movies.
I'd like to see, an interest. I don't
Mhm.
know who the next Bond is gonna be. I haven't seen it. Maybe you
There's a
do. I
short
don't even
list,
know
I
if it
know that. Yeah.
I would love to see a female take
Hmm.
on Bond. Kinda like the same thing that Doctor Who did
Yeah.
with the female doctor. I mean, why not? And,
Yeah.
I guess what issues could be with it is Bond is like he's very much just not only
Yeah.
like the secret agent spy, but just a very much embodiment of masculinity
Well, yeah. And
and just very chauvinistic almost, I guess
yeah.
you'd say.
That's why you go with Nomi. You just make it 007, but you don't say James Bond 007. Just 007 Give her a
Mhm,
movie or two while whoever is going to be the next quote unquote James Bond can play
mhm,
like junior agent or something. And then when Nomi has to like drop out naturally for her character, then you
mhm.
bring in this new guy, like you're James Bond now, and you just move the franchise forward. But you get a break. And I think that's something that would be interesting for the series is just exploring the world with the agents, but having a break from the main character for a movie or two. Like, one of the best movies of the Star Wars franchise of recent memory was Rogue One, which is
Mhm.
it's almost a break for the main characters and the main story, while still being somewhat related because it's exploring the universe. People liked it, even though it ties in eventually. It's interesting to see the universe from a different perspective. That's why Andor worked. That's why
Mhm.
people loved the first season of The Mandalorian. I think a movie or two with a different double O in the lead before we go back to just doing James Bond would be an interesting choice and a fun one.
I think it'd be a nice, like to your point, like a little battery recharge for the
Hmm.
franchise to kind of, let's give it, this little bit of extra here, some side offs, the what 007 is, not just being a man, could be a woman, and
Hmm.
and let's see if we can come in hard with it again a little on down the road. And
Yeah.
talking Rogue One, like what got me so good with that movie is like you almost forgot at a few points, like, hey, they're not gonna make
They're
it.
not going to make it. No,
and you feel like at some point you're waiting for them to make it, and then you realize, oh wait, this is the story where they don't,
they
and
have
it
to.
get you, and,
Yeah.
and and it gets you because they're going into their end, and
Yeah.
they do it anyway, and it was brilliantly done. And let's just say that was the best 35 seconds of Vader that you got in any movie at
Oh
the
my
end of
God,
that.
yes. Oh
I need more
God,
of
yes.
that figure in my life, please.
Just wrecking shit and taking
Oh my
names. Hell
God,
yeah.
just like Vader in his prime there, just
Hmm.
force snapping necks through doorways because
Hmm.
he's just an absolute vicious savage.
But the way that the most recent James Bond movie clears the deck of legacy, the only
Hmm.
character still left from the franchise that would continue on in their role would be, well, I guess Moneypenny as well, but really M.
Hmm.
So the M, Moneypenny, Q, they could continue onwards, or you could recast them and keep the code names and code letters around. But
Hmm.
like most of the actual craft, all of Spectre and the lead of Spectre is dead. The other villain is dead. The Bond girl is off of with a new name and never has to be seen again. You
Hmm.
have the opportunity to reset the board in a way that I don't think any James Bond movie has really had a chance to, just by saying we're continuing this continuity without James Bond for a couple movies.
It really tied a nice bow around that whole little arcing story that
Hmm.
this version of Bond had. And like, cleared the deck, like you said. All the villains are gone, all the heroes are gone, the original M is gone, the code names are all that's left. And I
Yes.
think that was almost kind of the point, and
Yeah.
what they had to do to make this even more long going that it can go, and just have it go for another 50 years, 60 years down the
Yeah.
line. Who knows? They
Yeah.
really had to kind of like give it that reboot without it being a reboot, and really giving it a definitive end. And I thought they did a really good job at this. I saw this movie maybe like a month or two ago. I hadn't seen it in quite a while. I didn't see it when it came out, so I watched it a little while ago on a
Yep.
recommendation from a friend. Like, oh yeah, I love Bond. How did I miss this? Let me throw it on and watch it. And it's a crisp 160 plus minutes.
Oh my
But
God.
but
Yeah. It
but
moves. It does move.
it didn't feel like it,
No, it
right? It,
doesn't.
it it did not drag like the hour and 40 minutes of, like, some of these other movies have felt like
Mhm.
Skyfall felt every bit of an hour and 40
Oh my
minutes.
God. It felt longer than that.
and,
It felt
and,
like
and I liked that movie. And
it
it felt long.
it felt
uh,
long. And then Spectre just feels interminable.
and again, like I said, such high hopes, and that's another 148 minutes of my life I will never get back.
Never
um
get back. It's I'd rather go back and watch the Halloween trilogy again than
Yeah, I'd rather do that again. But I mean, for being 160 minutes, almost 3 hours of movie,
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings territory kind of stuff here, and but didn't feel like it. It
Yeah, no.
was almost like
Mhm.
Tarantino-esque with the way he can do that with some
Mhm.
movies. Like,
Mhm.
you're watching, and then next thing you know, you got to get up to go to the bathroom. You hit pause, and you have an hour left, and like, oh shit, I've been watching this for 2 hours. Oh my god, but it didn't feel like it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's very watchable. It's not the best of his run. I do still think the first two probably
Oh
elevated the
yeah.
James Bond franchise better than anything else could. But
Mhm.
it's very it's the next best of the set for me.
Yeah, I agree.
So okay, so Bonds for you then. Who would you rank as your favorite?
Oh, I mean, I I want to say Pierce Brosnan just because like that was when I was in my early teens
Mhm.
and like that was like I guess my Bond. I was just a little too young for Dalton to kind of be my Bond in those late '80s movies. So Brosnan kind of like was the Bond that I grew up with, I guess I'd say.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say I would say Daniel Craig is probably my favorite of the recent ones, and
Mhm.
Connery I would think is the gold standard for the franchise in my opinion.
I really, if we're going to outlaw Lazenby, because I mean that's
Mhm.
fair. He only got the one. Although I would rank him high on the list no matter what. I think Dalton and Brosnan has to have their respects and brought
Mhm.
something interesting. But I would probably go with Craig as well. Not
Mhm.
because he's one that I grew up with. I saw both Dalton and Brosnan back in the day, even if I was young. But because I
Mhm.
think he had the best overall continuity of his movies.
It was the best continuation of a story for
Hmm.
that one Bond. You know,
Hmm.
a lot of the other Bonds just kind of were like Bond to villain, Bond to villain, Bond to villain,
Yeah.
save the world, get the girl, bang the girl,
Spectre.
save the
Yeah,
world.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah. It took 5 movies and didn't quite make them like a quadrilogy or whatever you want to call it, but it really
Quintilogy.
had
Yeah.
an overarching story between
Mhm.
all of them that tied in quite well, and it was really nice little bow around it at the end, and
Yeah.
you felt bad, but you knew that like this is how it has to end is if we're going to keep going, and
Yeah.
and that's the whole point.
And that will be interesting to see what they do. I'm sure they're not going to follow our idea. I'm sure they're just going to be like, new James Bond, we're just going to reset everything. Maybe some characters carry over, like we had M carry over from the previous franchise into the
Hmm.
current Bond franchise. But
Hmm.
um, whatever they do, it is interesting to see what they're going to do. I mean, even if they don't clear the deck and keep Nomi on as 007, I think wisely spending a few years with Bond off screen before you bring him back again would be smart.
I agree. These ebbs and flows of these franchises, they need some time to kind of just like a little bit of a break, a little bit of a reboot, recharge the batteries, and
Yeah.
this is the perfect timing. I mean, you took who was Bond for the last 15 plus years, and now that Bond is no more. So
Yep.
what better time than to give it a break, let the writing recommence, keep going go back in the lab, figure it out, and start fresh.
I agree. And with that, this has been Not So Live from Asteroid G. I'm Mike Finkelstein. I am not volunteering to be the next James Bond. With me in the booth was.
It was the other Mike, and I buy you as a nice little version of Q, though. I could see you come up with some fun gadgets.
I don't know. I don't think they want me for that role. But we will see you guys next time.